Hi, I'm Toby Gray, the leader of Team 7, the HTML High Rollers, here with a brief overview of our project, PHP Hangman. You can see our COD link and the URL of the game, and our project selected topic was Hangman. A brief description of our project is, this is the classic game of Hangman, implemented using PHP concepts such as session and form handling in which the player can enter a letter into a form and have it validated and checked if it's a correct letter in a randomly assigned word through PHP. I was in charge of PHP functionality for the game. John was in charge of data storage, in which PHP was used to read and write to a file. And Eric was in charge of the UI and design of the game. And here you can see a brief listing of all the meetings we've had between the assignment and completion of the project. With that out of the way, we are proud to present our project, PHP Hangman.
Let's start off with the problem. We had to decide on a project that only used HTML and PHP. Can't use anything else. We chose Hangman out of all the options. Hangman requires some way to save data on the server. We had to choose between cookies, sessions, text files. We couldn't use database systems like MySQL or JavaScript to make the game. I saw all these problems early on in the demos and as we were making it. The main problem was saving letters in an array, saving the animations, and I was assigned personally to be the scoreboard guy. So what were the requirements, inputs and outputs wise? In our code, we had the user input their name and select the difficulty for submission using the form attribute. It is handled and validated by the logic in PHP. Is passed to variables in the array to create the parameters. We also inputted letters to be processed same way for the game. The PHP will explain what's the correct letter. It will score each word. Once the letters are inputted, it will output the score. If it's the wrong letter, it will be 0 points. The user data and the score from those variables will be logged. We stored them into a file similar to the .txt file to keep the username and score. You'll see the output in the win screen or the scoreboard in the beginning. What was the requirements address? Our code consists of, well, I will address most of the requirements here. Our code consists of PHP for the server-side use of COD and HTML for the front-end presentation where the user interact with the game. So the final result was we use sessions and arrays to store those variables, and we appended the user's name and score to a file called sname.html, and that is where all the data will be outputted. Our HTML use form action attribute input types. You'll see the text in the text box, and you'll see the radios, the buttons for the form processing. You'll see that in the start screen. Login and user registration is addressed by validating when the user inputs the player's name in the text box, and once they choose the difficulty and submit it, the logic will be shown in the PHP. This is what I personally coded. You'll see in the top left, I made an array for defined words. I initialized it into an array. You'll see examples of fruits. I set each fruit to a point system, 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 10 points. This was early on in my demo that I shared with the group. And then on the right, you'll see I echoed the display for the variable user point submitted word, and then it will get the score. It'll get the content and write it to the score.html empty blank file, and then at the bottom you'll see that that file is appended and it will be outputted. You'll see how the data is saved, and this is the UML diagram that will explain how exactly our game works. You'll have the user. They'll log into the COD server. They'll log into the game, which is on the COD server. The screen starts off with them registering their name. They'll select the difficulty from the radio buttons. It extends to once they hit the start button, they'll start the game. They'll start the 6 rounds. Each round is has a score applied to the round and the word, and then after they guess each word, for each guessing attempt is 0 points, and the attempts will go down, 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 and after each attempt they hit the submit button. If their attempts run out, they'll get a lose screen, but if they reach at the end of the level, they'll go to a win screen, which will display all the previous users.
Our design solutions and key features. The primary design choice for this project was to maintain the simplicity of Hangman, presented as if you were playing on a whiteboard. We implemented PHP session variables that were utilized for the ability to store and update variables between various pages, allowing PHP code to rerun on user submission to constantly update or reset variables as needed between the variables of various screens. Links to PHP only pages were utilized in order to reset variables as well as update those that needed to be updated, such as the scores and the rounds, and redirect it back to the page, to the game. With every user submission, their entered letter would be analyzed if it was correct in terms of the game, and subsequently either fill in a letter or take away a chance, as well as respond to the game. This would play into one of the notable features of the game, the visualized Hangman. With every missing chance, the stick figure of the Hangman image would be further completed. UI was made to be simple and clean, reminiscent of the original look of playing Hangman on whiteboards. The goal was to have the user be immersed in the task of solving each word for a better score. The loading of the Hangman parts with decreasing chances was created using PHP script to operate on the session variables, allowing different pictures of the Hangman to load in as you play based on remaining attempts. Overall UI was presented with simplicity and nostalgia in mind, innovating it with functionality of form inputs and variable updating. Animation was employed when entering the start and end screens, as well as to provide user response on whether their guess letter was right or wrong. On start, the page would have an intro screen that would fade out and reveal the site. On the one page, the text would fade in, revealing one after another as though they were being written on the screen. On losing or winning, text would fade in on screen to inform the player of their loss or win.
Here's a demo to demonstrate how our game runs. So here we are. On page load, we're met with this animation. It fades away and reveals the screen. Let's go ahead and put the difficulty on easy. Put in my name, Toby. Here we get a little brief introduction how to play. Here's a scoreboard that'll update with all the users' names and such. Let's go ahead and start that. So here we have a 4-letter word. Let's go ahead and enter a letter. So the letter E was actually in the word. So its respective place was filled. And of course we haven't used this before, so it gets added to the used letters list. Let's go ahead and do E again. Look at that. Nothing happens, but it does prompt us that we already tried to use this letter. So let's go ahead and add an M. That was in the word. I, also in the word, so it fills its respective spot. Let's go ahead and enter something wrong. Z. So this gets added to the used words list, but that was wrong. So our attempts actually went down, and the Hangman image progressed. Let's go ahead and finish this up. So look at that. Got the word right, and we win. Here we have a 3-letter word. Put E. That wasn't in it. So it progresses, and our attempts go down. Let's enter an A. Hey, that's in it. Let's finish up the word, and look at that. We win. So here we got another 4-letter word. Let's enter E. That was in the word. What about an M? We fill it out. We get time again. And notice our score, by the way. Here we have 6 attempts remaining because we got this on the first try. And so when we progress to the next page, that gets added to our score. We went from 10 to 16, and we had 6 attempts left, so it added 6 to 10. Just to reward getting it right without making a mistake. So let's go ahead and try this again. E was not in the word. A was not in the word. What about O? O is not in the word. U. That's not in the word either. How about a G? Nope, that's not in there either. An M? Oh, an M was in there. So what could it be? Well, let's try a T. Nope. So we lost all our attempts. The hangman's completed, and we get flashed with that you lose screen. How's about if we win? So we cut back to a winning position here. As you can see, I'm on round 5 of 6. The counter's been going up every time I hit next, to progress to the next round. Let's go ahead and finish this word. So here, we hit next. You'll see we're around 6 out of 6 now. Let's fill in this. And look at that. We got it. And instead of saying next, because we're at round 6 out of 6, we just completed the last round. We go to results now. And look at that. Prints our score. And it puts us in the scores list, along with good old test. And that's that. Here's some pseudocode to help understand how the game functions. So on the start page, the user is allowed input, which is then validated, accepting a name and difficulty. Then PHP uses a function to get a random word. At this point, session variables for the game are created, storing the user inputted ones, as well as creating the variables needed for the game, such as the word, rounds, score, attempts, blank spaces, and letter storage. From there, we go to the game page. On the game page, the user is allowed to enter a character, which is their selected letter for the game, which is then validated. If this letter hasn't already been submitted, this is added to the list of used letters. And if this letter isn't in the word, it's counted as wrong, and thus the chances are decremented. Else, if the letter is in the word, then the positions of that letter in said word are found, and then the equivalent positions in the blank spaces are then replaced with that letter. Going back to the top if, else, assuming the letter is in a blank space, and in this scenario the letter has already been submitted before, then nothing happens to the blank. And a warning is generated telling that the letter was already used, updating no variables. Continuing to the game page, if all the blanks have been filled, as in the user correctly guessed all the letters, we go to the win page. Otherwise, keep reloading the same page to run this code again. Then on the win page, all the remaining chances are added to the score, a new word is selected, and all the other game variables are set back to default to continue the game, and we return to the game page. Here are some PHP concepts that were essential to the game's development. First of all, there was heavy involvement of the PHP session variables. These variables were very important due to their persistent nature, which allowed them to be modified and changed but still continue to exist between page reloads. Next, PHP form handling for user input. This form handling and validation was important to not only check whether or not the user's input was a valid one, but also in terms of the game analyze it whether or not it's correct. And lastly, the PHP header and exit functions were important, as it allowed us to direct to a page where PHP code can execute and then redirect back to where the game takes place. At the bottom here, we have the start page. First, the user's input is checked whether or not it submits, and then validated whether or not it contains just a blank space. Generate an error if it contains nothing but a space. Otherwise, if the name is valid, all the variables for the game are created, including setting the session name, setting the default number for the rounds and score, accepting the user's difficulty, as well as generating a random word and its blank variant, as well as resetting the attempts and letters. And here we have the next page, which was used to reset game variables, as well as increment the user's score between rounds. First, the letters array is reset to reset the entered letters. The score is appended in such a way that the user's remaining attempts are added onto it. The attempts are reset back to their default state. A new word is grabbed. The rounds are incremented, and any warnings that may have existed are reset. Moving on, we have the getWord function, which was essential in selecting words. It takes the difficulty that the user selected, as well as a random variable, which was put into I, to select a random word from our list of words based on difficulty. And depending on the difficulty in these if statements, it selects a random word from the list, its respective list of words. And at the bottom, we have getBlank, which was used to create a blank equivalent, in which the word's length is read, and for every character it has, another blank space is added to the equivalent blank variable. And lastly, we have our letter verification system, which was used to check whether or not a letter was correct or not. So first at the top, we have a check to make sure that the session variable name is set, which is to prevent people entering the page other than the link on the start page. And then we have the validation for the user input. Once submit is checked, the inputted letter, turned to lowercase to prevent any capital letters messing it up, is checked whether or not it's already submitted in the array of letters representing already used letters. If it's not in there, then the letter is added and no warning is generated. And then it checks whether or not it's in this session word ID, which is the selected word. If that letter is not in there, the attempts are decreased. Otherwise, if it is in there, for each space in the word, if any of those spaces match the letter, in the blank array, the equivalent space is changed to be equal to the letter. And of course, the index is incremented in order to do this over the entire word across every instance of the letter. Otherwise, at the top, from the if statement at the top, if the letter is not blank, and else if the letter is already existent in the letters array, then a warning is generated and no variables are updated. And upon submission, the page reloads in order to run through this code again. Regarding testing, here are some early plans and demos we made. So from the get-go, the idea was to get a word, in this case test, and then create equivalent blank spaces for each one of the letters. Then, upon user submission of a letter, in this case T, every index of that word with that letter is found, and then the respective indexes of the blank are then updated, which we then followed through with our code. The idea is staying relatively the same. We tested our scores system here, in which the user would enter in their name and then enter in some word which would get them so many points, and then their score would be logged, as you can see, all the previous users. We have our wireframe model, which was an early design of what our game was supposed to look like from a UI standpoint. And then we had the first demo for functionality, in which the word ID is displayed for testing purposes to know whether to enter a right or wrong input to see how it affects the game, as well as testing out form submission to make sure the variables got passed on. And regarding the different browsers, we verified that it works on Chrome and Edge. However, there are some issues with Firefox. I believe those to be an issue with display none, which is important for the animations, but unfortunately does not work, and thus blocks elements for the Firefox version. And lastly, the bugs we encountered. For one, you might have noticed on the previous page, there was double submission of scores. As you can see, the same score, the same name, and the same submitted word is printed twice. And the issue was that there was a segment of code that was meant to validate that ended up printing the user submitted info twice. Removing this, while unfortunate to lose the security validation, did allow it to work properly. And then we had an issue with non-existent variables in which you would load up the page and none of the variables would exist and therefore couldn't be printed, leaving a bunch of blank spaces. However, this was resolved with the verification that these words exist, or that certain variables exist. If, say, name wasn't entered, it would redirect you back to the start page so that you could enter your name there, and this would prevent you from just loading directly into the game site rather than from start. So overall, both of these were resolved.